I've recently gotten to a place where I'm experiencing curiosity. I feel like I'm not just living out of rest, where I'm not just rested, momentarily rested, but I'm experiencing it now as a state of being. And I think that's what we want to get to. We're not just talking about being rested because you took a nap on the couch after church on Sunday. We're talking about what does it look like to live in a perpetual state of feeling rested. And that goes against when I talked last week about the 150-year shift of family, it goes against the grain of everything, the direction that we're heading in, especially over the last 50 years, 10 in particular. It goes against the grain, and you have to have permission. Let this be permission for you to start seeking a state of restedness.
Ooh.
I won't lose hope in the night when the fire's growing dim. I'll just let go and I'll try. Help me walk this road and find my way back home. Find my way back home. Find my way home.
Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. We are in season 3 talking about moving your family beyond the matrix. And I hope you enjoyed last week's episode on a 150-year review of family and just moving beyond the matrix that we find ourselves in. And we really just want to take these next number of weeks to look at 5 familial shifts that we can make, things that we've been doing. We'll tell stories about that, but just, I think, questions we've been asking about family life, and leaving you ultimately with the question of why are you making the decisions that you are in how you lead your family?
I think isn't that like the marker of wisdom too? To just ask those why questions, like continually.
Yeah.
Otherwise you do just get on this hamster wheel of either the mundane or the typical. And I don't think that typical is always correct for us. And especially for us individually, like how the Lord has made each family unique. And I think that's what sets people free, is to start to realize there is a unique imprint for you that is probably very different than what you see even around you. And I do think that like these conversations, like to talking about like the history of where family has been, shows you that there's no typical, like there is no quote unquote normal. This is just the day and age that we find ourselves in right now. And that doesn't mean the way that family is being done is the way that it is to be done. And I think asking these questions and also like addressing the pain points, which is kind of where I think we're going to go these next episodes, is this movement from a pain point that you notice in your family, in your marriage, in your relationships, to like, what is the peaceful answer? What's the antithesis? What is the movement from one place of discomfort in some way to like a place of, I think, more comfort?
Well, and I think too, the question remains is, what does God have for your family?
Exactly.
What is God leading you to do for your family? So again, it's not like there's a right and a wrong answer, but I think there is a wrong answer when you lay your head on the pillow at night and you're longing for something more. You're wishing you had more time with your kids. You wish your marriage were in a better place. You're wishing there's this sense of, I just wish this, and this. And I think we live in a day and age. We live in a country where it's the next thing. I met with a guy today, a friend of mine, and we were talking about why a number of different mentors of mine have had this. We've kind of had this conversation of why does it feel like 90% of people don't have vision? Where's the vision? And I think it's because we're caught in the matrix. I think we're just trying to get out of the exhaustion. We're trying to get out of the everyday grind. As Solomon writes about it in Ecclesiastes, we're just trying to survive the day. And as a husband, I'm just trying, look back on my life, I'm just trying, especially when the kids were in certain ages and earlier in the years, it's like, I'm going to do everything I can to get my work done. And then I got to get home so I can make sure that I'm getting the kids and doing what I think Christy wants me to be doing so that I keep her happy, so that we can at least go to bed with some semblance of peace in the home. And with no sense of vision beyond, oh, let's just kind of make sure that we're all settled. I think that's where many of us live. We live I just want to make sure that things are settled. Oh, we're good. And then we just go to the next day and we go to the next day. And I think one day what ends up happening is we all wake up, maybe the midlife crisis, and you go, why?
Yeah.
What's the purpose of all of this?
Well, and I think what you're describing is survival. And it's moving from survival to paying attention to longing, right? Where it's like, what am I actually longing for? And when you're in survival, you can't think, like longing doesn't even get to like poke its head up much because you are surviving. And so it's like paying attention to beauty or wonder or something like that's delightful. Like your radar isn't on those things because all it's doing is scanning for threat. Like it's looking for, like, it's literally like whack-a-mole. Like that's what it's, you come home and it's like just whacking down all the problems, all the issues, like just get through the day. And it is true. Like that is, I think, what you hear so much in culture. And yet, so I think the question then is like, how do we move then from that mode of living, survival, to this desire for more? Because I don't even think, like, we could say we desire more, but like you're saying, there's no vision because there's no content. Like I have no box for that. I don't even have this space. And like neurobiologically, it actually makes sense that you have no space for vision. Yeah. Because you're surviving. Like in that, if you look at it from even like a nervous system standpoint, which dictates all the systems of the body, including your thoughts, like you can't think thoughts of vision or creativity or connection.
There's no curiosity. Yeah.
There's none. And so just like, I just want to put a blanket of like understanding over that there is a reason why we're struggling for vision because we're not living out of connection and peace and curiosity.
And this gets to one of the familial shifts that we'll talk about is that purpose, that vision. Yeah. And we were talking about it this morning. I was talking about it with some friends where the sense of why aren't people wanting this? Why aren't people desiring it? And I said, it's because so many of us are in survival mode. Yep, and today what we want to talk about is moving from exhausted to rested. Because I think to your point, we have to get to a place in our nervous systems, we have to get to a place in our lives where we experience that healing, that healing from just being exhausted and living in survival mode. And, to your point, I think to have this conversation, it's like, I've heard this analogy before. We live in such a way that it's like going to an airport. You think about, I just got to get packed. Once I get the house ready and we get packed, then we're going to be good. Then I can calm and I can rest. It's like, oh wait, but now I got to get to the airport and I got to fight traffic and I got to make sure that I get there on time. We got to leave at this time. I want to be an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours ahead of time. So let me just get to the airport. Once I get to the airport, then I'll be good. Then you get to the airport, you park your car and it's like, oh, now I got to get through security. And then you're through security. You're like, okay, I'll be good. Now I got to fight to figure out where am I going on the plane? Like where am I at in line? Am I going to get a seat if you're flying Southwest? Like where am I going? And then you say, now once I get there, I'll be fine. And it's like, we live our lives that way where it's like to the next thing and then out. And we never truly live in the moment where we're not thinking about the next thing. And I've recently gotten to a place where I'm experiencing curiosity. I feel like I'm not just living out of rest, where I'm not just momentarily rested, but I'm experiencing it now as a state of being. And I think that's what we want to get to. We're not just talking about being rested because you took a nap on the couch after church on Sunday. We're talking about what does it look like to live in a perpetual state of feeling rested. And that goes against the last, when I talked last week about the 150-year shift of family, it goes against the grain of everything, the direction that we're heading in, especially over the last 50 years, 10 in particular. It goes against the grain, and you have to have permission. Let this be permission for you to start seeking a state of restedness.
Ooh. That's it. I think like even in Christian culture, we've talked about rest. We talk about Sabbath, we talk about rest, and we have as well, like many times. And yet it's missing it's a temporary posture, perhaps, and it's not a baseline state. Like, how do we actually live out of a baseline of curiosity and rest and connection and creativity? How do we move there versus like this, I was going to say this response from the body's perspective that actually makes sense physiologically, because we're living under such high pressure conditions that feel like threat, that feel like a bear chasing us, that feel, I saw this meme on internet the other day, and it's like this mom who goes out her back door. She's in her robe and she like lays face down in the grass. And she's like, I'm just reminding myself that I'm getting the kids ready for school. I am not being chased by a bear. And I was like, that's it. It was so good. And I think, thank goodness, like the conversation is actually starting to shift toward that. Like more people are being aware of the significance of how a nervous system functions in the human body, that God created it to be the director. It's like the grand director of all the systems. So that's digestive, that's endocrine, that's immune, like all of the things. It's our thoughts. So if all of those things are directed by one system, I think it's probably important that we figure out what is tripping the system to continually tell us that it's not safe enough to rest yet, that we have to just keep racing, keep going. If I just survive this day, like we're not in a state of physical survival anymore. It's become emotional. It's become spiritual, I think, as well, because they're inextricably linked. You can't separate out the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. And so I think that's why these conversations are so helpful for us to sort of dive into a very deep, but also more holistic approach to what rest looks like. This isn't taking a nap on a Sunday. This isn't even just like, this is moving beyond just like practicing Sabbath. All good, all great practices. But this is where, I mean, all these beautiful women that I get to work with, where it's like, I love my life. I love my children. I love my husband. We have a great family. And yet I want to be joyful. I want to be playful. I want to be present. And yet I feel anxious all the time. I'm constantly battling anxiety. I'm constantly battling fear. I'm just running from thing to thing to thing. And it's like this fleeting, like, where is joy? And I heard it said the other day when we talk about delayed gratification, and, you know, there's great wisdom in delayed gratification, but that we've actually learned to live in a state of delayed joy. So it's like, I can't be joyful yet until. So it's like your airport analogy.
Yeah.
Like, when I hit this, then I'll allow myself to feel joy. And it's like we've kept pushing it off because there's this invisible train like racing behind us that says it's not safe enough to feel joy right now.
Well, and the fascinating part about that, Brené Brown talks about this for boding joy, and how in her research found that when someone loses someone significant in their life, like a spouse, it was like, I waited until this big moment where we were going to have this big vacation, and we were going to go on this big vacation. So I lived my life in such a way that we were going to go on this big vacation. We never got to go on that vacation. But the thing that I miss the most is my husband sitting around in the morning, having a cup of coffee, and, coming downstairs and seeing him reading the newspaper. Or it's like it's like putting off joy to this like vacation or this big thing. But yet the joyful moments are right here. They're right now. They're with you. And, that's the fascinating part about it. Your imagination, your body doesn't know what's real and not real. So your imagination is, so if I'm sitting with my son, our 4-year-old was just in here in the podcast studio. He had the microphone, he had the headset on, he's listening to everything. And there was a moment where he is, making mess with the wires and he's moving things around. And I can choose in my imagination to go, man, I'm going to get stressed over this. I need to get him out of here. And in the past, that could have been my imagination, versus going, you know what? He's enjoying himself. He's exploring the world around him. He's not going to break anything. If he does, we'll figure it out. Let him enjoy the moment. Let him feel like he's a part of what dad is. That is a mindset shift in me that influences how I show up for him. But I can't do that if I'm not already living out of a rested state. If I'm living out of a heightened state of anxiety, now all of a sudden every little thing is, you're like, stop it. And
well, the system can't take more.
Yeah.
Right. So it's already living in full surveillance mode, like scanning for threat at all times. And so you keep poking that system when it's already on high alert, like that's what people will call it, a nervous breakdown. I mean, that's really what that is. It's like the system actually can't take anymore. And so it makes total sense. And I also want to say too, I also don't want people to feel like the goal is to live from this peaceful, rested, like people talk about nervous system regulation. Like this is the goal, to just be like zen and calm all the time. That is not true. That is to be our baseline. Like that's the way God created us, to be curious and compassionate and content and able to connect. And those are the things that happen in that state. However, he also designed us to be able to run from a bear when we need to run from a bear, and moves us into a state of, we need to be able to fight for righteousness. We need to be able to get away from threat. Like these are the things that are hardwired into us to create safety for us to survive, but also to fight for the things that matter to us. So that is relationship. That's connection with one another. And I just want to say that too. Like there is this, I think, misconception and therefore shame around this idea of I wish I was this calm person all the time. That's not the goal. And in fact, sometimes that's just a really repressed person where you're pushing that down so hard for so long. That's actually what we call it. It's called in the polyvagal system, like the dorsal, where you've actually shut down to numb and disconnected. And sometimes they look calm on the outside, and they might even feel it because they actually don't feel much of anything at all. And again, that is not how we were created. Jesus came to give us life to the full. That means being able to access the full range of emotion, from anger and grief and sadness to joy and curiosity and connection, and also fear. Like all of these things were created on purpose and with purpose. And so shoving them down isn't also the way to handle it. So I guess now we're saying like all the things not to do. So like, how do we then as a family move from this state of threat and exhaustion, because that's what it feels like, to a baseline of rest, meaning that we're able to move into threat when we need to. We're able to move into actually even like a numb, disconnected state when we need to conserve energy. But we also have the ability to then move back to this baseline. Fear, anxiety, living on high alert isn't our baseline anymore. This state of contented curiosity can be. So, and how do we do that? Especially as we're talking in the context of a family. I think it adds a whole other dynamic when you're living with little people and big people that are constantly poking threat at you, because they are. Living alone is actually, I would say, would tend to be easier because you're simply not facing the number of stimuli in a day that can potentially signal threat. And that's what the system is concerned about at all times. And so when your kids are at you and asking, mom, dad, mom, hey, and it's not even necessarily bad things, but it's constantly things being thrown at your direction that the system is scanning. Is this, and then if it registers like, this is too much, that in itself is a threat, even if it's too much good thing.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing to think through is it, for me, I was just processing as you were talking there, it's taken me quite a long time to get to this place. And so you're talking about like, what do you do
Yeah.
I think there's already a prescription laid out for us in Scripture, starting in Genesis 1, from the very moment God created, because He created rest, He created our nervous systems, and I think we have to start there. So let me say this first of all too, that fear, before I get into those practical applications of it and how we've implemented some of those things, because these are shifts we've made. These are shifts we have seen over the years. We're not just talking theoretically about these things. We're talking we've lived these things out. We are living these things out. And what they're opening me up to is my ability to be aware of God, my ability to hear from God, my ability to not just follow Father, Son, and Holy Bible, but Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and walk with the Spirit every single day of my life, where I'm listening to Him and I'm aware of what He's telling me to do, the people I'm interacting with, the questions to ask, those types of things. I want to interact with Him. I want to see God. Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And so I'm trying to learn this holy curiosity of seeing God around me every day, every moment of my life. And I couldn't live that before because I was living in an exhausted state. And part of that exhausted state is living in fear, as Christy said. And we have to take that fear to God. You have to be able to label. One practical application of this is taking your emotions to God in prayer and going, "God, what do you want me to know about this?" I love the way Jamie Winship describes this. He says, fear is false evidence appearing real. And you look at that and you go, okay, if I am in a family system where I have a lot of kids, like it can get really loud in our house. We got boys, and those boys are wrestling and they're doing all kinds of boy things. And I'm believing that they're being rambunctious and too loud and overwhelmed or overwhelming, and that they're gonna that therefore is going to translate out into their lives. Then I need to shut them down. That is false evidence appearing real, when the reality is they are boys being children and enjoying childish behavior because that's who they are. They're not being disrespectful. They're not doing anything, right? And so I have to be able to allow the loudness. I have to be able to allow the wrestling. I have to be able to allow some of the things that are going on to let them be children, rather than reacting out of my own exhausted state and fear to jump in and shut that down. And
but can I jump in here?
Yeah.
Because this is
don't.
where
You're not allowed.
Well, I don't want you to lose your train of thought, like where you're going. But can I just say, the goat got into the chicken fence. This is a beautiful, I get to watch, the dogs have been wrestling, the goat just got on the chicken fence. Anyway, okay, side note. But what about the parent, like you and I, the you and I's, who are overwhelmed by the kids wrestling, who are overwhelmed by the noise, we can cognitively know that this is childish behavior because they're children, and that they actually need to just get this out. They're being beautiful kids, not disrespectful at all, just playful and
I think
loud.
it starts though by, and this is where we have been, I think it starts by recognizing what is going on within you that's causing you to be overwhelmed by it, rather than taking it out on your kids or making your kids be the problem.
Exactly.
And that's what we do out of an exhausted state.
Yes.
And then we put that burden on the kids.
This is exactly where I want to go, because we become victims.
Yes.
Right? We become the victim of the situation, versus recognizing we are the only ones that are able to minister to ourselves. The kids don't know they're having that impact on us. Your husband, your wife doesn't probably know. This is our job. Okay, so now I'm the adult. Even for kids, we teach our kids this. We do this in Kids RQ as well. This is learning to attune to your own body. So whoa, I'm starting to notice my shoulders are up here. I feel like I'm going to come out of my skin. The feeling of when that's starting to be this is too much. This is too much. So this is where you don't have to be a victim anymore. You get to make a choice that also cares for you. And this is where I think it's so much simpler than we often make it. Often we'll lash to anger, because anger is the big, powerful thing that protects the vulnerable thing. And so the vulnerable thing is that I feel scared right now. Like, this is too much. You wouldn't probably use the word fear but overwhelm, or I'm trying to think what other term you might even use. Like, most of the time it's like, I'm annoyed, right? Basically, it's this state of, it's too much for you. And that doesn't mean it's too much for somebody else, but it is for you. And you are the only one who's going to step in and care for you. That's no one else's job. So you get to be the one that says, "Ooh, this is a bit much for me right now. Hey guys, mom's going to go upstairs for a minute. I'm going to go do a load of laundry. I'm going to go lay on my bed and shut the door. I'm going to step outside. I'm just going to, go get the mail. I'm going to go pet a goat. Whatever." You get to be the one that protects you, because that's ultimately all you're wanting to do, is protect you. But so often we do it in a way that actually then destroys relationship with other people, where we come in so big because we've let it go on too far, too long, too much, right? So we then come out swinging because we start to feel like the victim. And these are the ways that we start to intercede for ourselves, like step in the middle. That's what that means. To intercede is to like step in between. So I get to step in between my kids and the scared little me who's like, oh my gosh, this is too much for me. I get to step in the middle and say, what does she need right now? And we do this constantly as we navigate like sibling rivalry, like sibling things. But we
I
get
also
to do
think
this
it's
for us.
important that you speak truth. And that's the key here. We need to speak truth. And
Meaning what? What do you
meaning being able to go, like, for me to be able to say to Christy, I am feeling like a victim right now. Something is going on within me. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I feel like I'm pulling too much weight. I have too many responsibilities right now. I need help. I need a break. But be able to do that in your marriage instead of allowing that to fester and become resentment towards one another, or have it come out passive aggressively, have it come out defensively. Being able to truth tell about your own inner world, not just with God. I feel fearful. I feel like a victim. I feel overwhelmed. But to be able to do that with your spouse, so that your spouse can look at you and go, okay, what can I do to serve you right now? How can I help? Just to give you 5 minutes, again, this isn't like, I think a lot of times as men, we think my wife just came to me and said, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. In the past, I would have went, oh my gosh, our marriage isn't good. She wants to go to marriage therapy. This is a state of being that she's felt for a very long time and hasn't told me. But the reality is when you make this a conversation ongoing, now it can be, I just need 5 minutes to walk to the mailbox.
Yeah.
I need to walk around the fence line and pet the goats. And now I feel more relaxed to be able to go, go do that. Knowing that I might be overwhelmed too and exhausted as well, but give her the space so that I can then go get and fight for that space too. But we've got to be able to truth tell in these day-to-day conversations. And again, we can talk more about this, but moving from exhausted to rest, I think this is part of, and I just to even go deeper with it, when we talk about praying without ceasing, take this stuff to God on an ongoing basis. Yeah. Pray about these things.
And I think often, like, to just, if that felt like a lot, like, oh gosh, I don't even know where to start, maybe just say this, it feels like a lot right now. Mm-hmm. Like, that might be all the language you have, because it's so confusing, because there's so many things happening at once that you can't even organize like what emotion you're feeling. And I think people get really stuck in that. So then the confusion also generates a ton of fear and a ton of survival energy, because it's like, this is big, this is huge. Most emotion is so temporal, guys. Like, it's so just this moment. Like, truly, and you can make it 1 minute more. You can make it 5 minutes more. But you also need to know that this is temporal. It will not last. No emotion is permanent. Ever, 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 ever. It is trying to just pass through.
And the more you feed it and the more you suppress it, it will prolong it in both those cases. Yes. Whether you feed it and ruminate on it and meditate on it, or you suppress it and try to shut it down, it will last longer. The way to allow it to pass through is to truth tell, to admit it, to identify it, and to be able to call it out into the light so that you can identify, what's this emotion trying to tell me? Yeah. Lord, what are you trying to tell me in it? And what do I need to know then to therefore live a more rested state? Be curious. I mean, at the end of the day, rested state is about curiosity. Be curious also about your inner world and your emotions and what you're experiencing so that you can live a more full life, in the here and now.
So, okay. So moving on, like from that then. So it's like identifying what do I need in the moment? What's going on? Like,
Well, and I think
then
that's the
what do I need?
internal world. I think that's the I think we just talked about the internal world. There's family rhythm shifts that I think are very important that you can make to live a rested life. And we see that starting in Genesis chapter 1. You go all the way back to the way that the Hebrew calendar, we've talked about this numerous times on our podcast. You can go back and listen to Sabbath episodes. We can link some of those in the show notes today. But without getting specific into our Sabbath day and what that looks like. But so that God created the earth in a 7-day rhythm. So on the 7th day, God rested. What was the very first thing Adam and Eve did after they were created? They rested. They were created to live from rest, not for rest. The Hebrew calendar, every single day, Genesis chapter 1, after day 1, and first came evening and then morning. Evening came and then morning day 2. Evening came and then morning day 3. And you see this pattern all throughout the chapter 1 as God's creating the earth because the day starts in the evening. Imagine starting your day with the most incredible meal. And then after you are fed, God says, you know what? I want you to go sleep for 8 hours. And while you're sleeping, I'm going to be doing things in your life, setting you up so that when you're awake, you can walk with me in the cool of the day. Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the day. When you're awake, you sit with me, and I will reveal to you the plans that I have for you while you were sleeping, the things I was orchestrating in your life. Sit with me. Let me share those with you, and then just finish out the rest of your day carrying out those plans and doing the things, leading your family well, leading your organization well, carrying out your assignment that God has for you on this earth. Just go do those things well with the rest that you have. And then he says at the end of every day, here's the other rhythm. Every day it was good. Every day he looked back at what he created and said, it is good. He celebrated all of the good that happened every single day. You talk about a nervous system shift. What if instead of looking at the end of every day exhausted, going, I wish I didn't have enough time for this, I didn't have enough time for that, looking back and going, what I created was good. Believing in the God of the universe, that he has every single one of your days numbered, written in his book, that every day he created us out of abundance of rest, the gift of Sabbath, the gift of rest, that every single day that you are given enough time to carry out the plans that God has for you to carry out every single day. You've been given enough. You already have enough. And so whatever you quote unquote didn't get done, you accomplished everything that God has accomplished for you for that day. There's nothing that you don't need to race to catch up. In fact, if anything, many of us, and this is that countercultural shift, what we're talking about today is reversing and slowing down in order to catch up.
Yeah. Ugh. I just was walking around the other day and I just kept hearing, I was walking outside with Micah. I had the puppy. We got a puppy. I don't know if we told people this. We got a puppy. A Great Pyrenees puppy, and he's so sweet.
You can check that out on Instagram.
I was walking around with the puppy, and then the goats were following. It was so cute. We also got goats. We didn't talk about that.
Got goats.
Which I told you because they got into the chicken fence. They like the chicken food. Anyway, but I was walking around with them, and in my mind, I'm starting to feel this like pressure in my chest, this like heaviness of like, you should be prepping right now. Because we're headed out of town. I've got Tinder and Fierce. I've got to prep for like these, and we're video recording them. And I'm feeling all this, like I should be preparing. It's really this like on guard feeling, like I should be tackling this right now. And it was as if I heard, you are a human being. And, I've heard that term, like a human being versus a human doing, but it's like, you are a human. It was like, you are a human being right now. Like you're just being. You are a human who's being. And just like, this is what I created you for. Obviously we were not called human doings. We are not to be identified for our worth by what we accomplish. And I think we all cognitively, like left brain, know that. And at the same time, there's this threat response of like, but I have to get, checking off the next thing. And it was like the Lord just, it was like, shh, 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 like thinking like Mary and Martha vibes, like you've chosen the better thing right now by just walking with your son and these little four-legged fuzzy creatures. And like, what if this is all you were made for? This is it. Like, this is the gift I have to give you. And you're off chasing these other things. They will never fulfill you. And I've actually not even asked you to do. Like, I'll tell you when I need you to do something. And it was something that was so subtle and yet so shifting something inside of me. And I realized like for years, we all know, I think, that we are not what we do. We know that we are not to just live by this litany of to-do lists. And yet, so many of us actually function that way. And so as we're talking about this moving from exhaustion to rest, make the list. What is the thing that is exhausting you? Where are the pressures? Whereas anywhere there's pressure, anywhere there's fear, anywhere there is this sense of lack or not enough, those are the places where we will keep striving. Those are the places that we haven't actually experienced, the love of God and the provision of God, the abundance of God, but also then the rest of God.
And that's when we talk about every single day, like looking back at the good that God has created. I think those are practices. Now let's identify what are, as you said, like what are the things that are overwhelming? What are the things, being a truth teller, telling that to your spouse. And so there are times where we talk about this 15 minutes a day where with your spouse, where you sit down and what is one positive and one uncomfortable feeling you had for the day. Practice this. This is you can practice where you just sit down together and you go, what was one uncomfortable and one awesome feeling I had today? And you can use your uncomfortable feeling right there to go, tomorrow I'm paying attention to this feeling in my life. Mm-hmm. And I think it's speaking to this thing I need to cut out, or I think it's it's pointing to this thing I need to change. We're not asking you to shift everything. Like we said, we've taken years to move from exhausted to rested. And so it's just, and again, I'm going to ask you this. If you've heard our podcast, I always say, what was your most useful takeaway from this episode? What is the one practical, most useful takeaway I'm going to leave this episode from and apply that thing in your life? And if this is the one, it's like, okay, 15 minutes a day with my spouse. I'm just going to say one positive emotion I had today, one uncomfortable. And you could do that with God. If you don't want to do it with your spouse, or if you're a single parent or a solo parent, you're like, I don't know who to talk to God about that. That is really a prayer of examine and ask Jesus where he was in the moment you were feeling that very feeling. That takes you away from your left brain into your right brain, experiencing God in your prayer, and the way he shows up is just remarkable so many times. And even that practice in and of itself is a way to move from exhausted to rested, because now you're inviting Jesus into your overwhelm. You're inviting him in and you're becoming curious about it, but you're doing so sitting with your eyes closed, just trying to see where he's at in those overwhelming moments. And so, to summarize, I think it's important you look at these rhythms. So you have your inner stuff, just paying attention to your inner world, as Christy was talking about. And then you also have these practical family rhythms that you can implement, whether that's one day a week of Sabbath, whether that is your ongoing, just thinking even about your day where you're celebrating at the end of a day. You're celebrating all the good things that were done and created. And I would just say this too, to get started here, even maybe you don't have an entire day that you can implement into your Sabbath. You're like, we do it Friday sundown to Saturday sundown in our family. Maybe you don't have a full day. Just start with a dinner. Start with a dinner a week with your family where you're making the dinner together and you sit down, you turn all the screens off in your house, no television, no iPhones or anything. and you sit down together as a family, and maybe you go around the table and you talk about what was my most positive emotion this week. What was my most uncomfortable emotion this week? You do it with your kids. What was the thing that has me most excited? What is one thing I learned this week? And then just celebrate rest. And, one of the things we do in our Shabbat dinner is we have the best dessert of the week. And so, the kids always look forward to ice cream or dessert on Friday nights on Shabbat. And so make it fun for your kids. Make it tactful, make it like tasteful. And you can even say, we taste and know that the Lord is good. There's an experiential component to rest, and a dinner a week to be able to just shut everything down is one of the most practical ways to be able to do that in your family as you think about this. And so there's family rhythms you can use, and then there's also the inner world that you can pay attention to.
I think that's the thing, is just there's both. And so
just find what works for you.
And notice what is like the first, like he said, what's your takeaway? What's the first thing you do? Don't try to tackle them all at the same time. But is it your inner world you're focusing on? Is it identifying emotion? Is it identifying the overwhelm? Is it starting to minister to yourself when you start to feel that way? Or is it some of these more practical things as a family?
And this one's on rest. We're going to get into another countercultural one next week on simplifying your life. And so sometimes simplifying can lead to rest. Yeah. And so you'll be able to kind of filter out that as well.
Yeah. Until next week, may your heart be awakened and your families revived.
May you find your way home.
All the fear that lies, leave him all.